At dinner, my cousin raised his glass and said, "To legacy, may we always own what matters." Everyone laughed, because they thought I was just the broke one renting on Alder Street. But what they didn't know was that I owned the entire building they were standing in. Quietly. Completely. Hi, I'm Elena Morgan. For years, my family mocked my small life, not knowing I was building a $2 billion real estate portfolio behind the scenes. What would you do if your own parents belittled you right inside a building you secretly owned? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? I arrived a few minutes late on purpose. Morgan dinners weren't known for warmth or punctuality, just polished forks and well-timed glances. The elevator opened onto the 7th floor, revealing the private dining hall we'd gathered in since childhood birthdays and promotion parties. Tonight, the candles flickered against glass walls, framing the Seattle skyline like a curated backdrop for another family performance. As I stepped in, I caught Brandon's eye. He offered a thin-lipped smile that didn't quite reach the creases beside his eyes. His Armani cufflinks gleamed as he raised his glass in a mock toast to me. "Elena," he said. "Didn't think you'd make it. Didn't realize Amtrak still ran this late." Aunt Claire chuckled already halfway into her wine. Victoria didn't even look up from adjusting the napkin on her lap, her handbag perched beside her like a second guest, glossy and proud. I pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table opposite my father. He gave me the usual nod, silent, transactional. I smiled politely and tucked my linen napkin into my lap. "Everyone Elena's here," Claire announced with the kind of cheerfulness reserved for unwanted guests. "Now we can start the important talk." "Brandon's been telling us about the ski resort," Victoria chimed in. "Jackson Hole. You should see the renderings, breathtaking. Truly next-level vision." Brandon leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Private access, designed by that guy who did Clooney's place. 14 cabins, fully geothermal. Big swing, but worth it," I nodded. "Sounds ambitious." "It is," he replied, his tone thick with pride. "But you know, high risk, high reward. Not really for everyone." Victoria leaned toward me, dropping her voice as if sharing a secret. "I just picked this up in Milan," she said, brushing the croc-skin clutch with 2 fingers. "It cost more than a year of rent in most neighborhoods. Probably more than Elena's place entirely," Brandon quipped. I kept my gaze steady on the salad fork. Claire gave a tight smile. "You still showing apartments? That little firm still in business?" I offered a smile. "Yes, still in business." Dad cleared his throat, but didn't look up from his phone. The silence wrapped around me like shrink-wrap, tight, clinical, polite. "I'd feel sorry for you," Victoria said, "but you always seemed fine living small." "She's just simple," Mom added gently. "Some girls aren't built for this life." "And that's okay?" I glanced down at my water glass. The stem left a faint ring on the mahogany. My fingers tapped once, then stopped. Brandon leaned in with mock concern. "Does your landlord know you're here? We don't want him thinking you upgraded." The laugh around the table was brief but sharp, like breaking glass under a napkin. I smiled. My landlord's very understanding. They didn't catch it. Dessert arrived, a trio of plates, each more elaborate than necessary. Pistachio brulee, bourbon poached pears, edible gold leaf because why not? The conversation shifted to business rumors. Something about a mystery fund buying up buildings near downtown. Brandon shook his head. "I swear these silent capital groups are everywhere. Ghost investors with too much money and no taste. Someone even said they're buying the Ashcroft building." "Ashcroft!" Claire blinked. "The one we're sitting in." "Yep," Victoria said. "It's been owned by a legacy trust for years, but word is it changed hands. No one knows who. Likely a foreign buyer, or some faceless tech billionaire trying to launder cash." Brandon snorted. I swirled the ice in my glass. It clinked softly. Victoria added, "Whoever it is, they're staying invisible. But I don't like it. Some things should stay in the family." I glanced at my watch. Brandon raised his glass again. "To legacy," he said, looking around the table with smug reverence. "May we always own what matters." I lifted mine too. "Some already do," I murmured. It slipped right by them. No one asked. No one noticed. I checked my watch again. 23 hours and 42 minutes until the press release went live. Until this building, their building would wear my name on every title deed. My phone buzzed gently beneath the napkin. A message from Grant Audit Packets finalized. Ready when you are. I took another sip of water. The room hummed with conversation, the kind that excluded me by design. But this time, I didn't mind. Let them savor the moment. Tomorrow, the taste would change. They used to laugh when I said I liked Alder Grove, called it charming in that bless-your-heart tone people reserve for things they find embarrassingly beneath them. I never corrected them. Let them think I lived there because I had no better option. Truth was, I stayed because it reminded me that power didn't have to be loud to be lasting. The morning after the dinner, I drove to Alder Grove. The rain had softened overnight, leaving everything damp and quiet, brick glistening under the weak November sun. My building stood like an old friend, slightly crooked, dignified, unshaken. Inside the hallway still smelled faintly of laundry and toast. Mrs. Lang's door was open a crack, her orange cat darting past my ankle. "You're up early," she called from the kitchen. I was about to start cinnamon rolls. "Rain woke me," I said. "Rain or conscience?" she teased. I smiled. She didn't know I was her landlord. Not in the official sense, anyway. Mira North owned the deed, and I owned Mira North. But the paperwork was invisible on purpose. When I bought this place in 2020, I had the option to raise it and build a 5-story condo with rooftop pools and no rent protections. But I didn't. Instead, I installed new boilers, preserved the original tile work, and ensured every lease renewal respected the spirit of the place. The tenants never knew the building had changed hands. They didn't need to. Later that morning, I met Grant at the cafe near Capitol Hill. He already had our table corner spot back to the window, documents spread in careful layers. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked, sliding over the file with the sticky tab that read Final Transfer. Ashcroft. "I've waited 4 years," I said. "This is the quiet part. The loud part's tomorrow." He nodded. "You don't have to scream to be powerful," he quoted, handing me a cappuccino. "Let the paperwork speak." That had been our motto since day one, since the summer of 2019, when Mira North was just a shell, and I was still working out of my apartment with 2 folding chairs and a $300 Chromebook. Back then, I used my own name until I realized the family would trace anything with Morgan attached. So we restructured, built a private trust, then layered in 2 holding companies. The first building I bought was in Tacoma, a dilapidated warehouse no one wanted. I turned it into a community art space. Then came Alder Grove, then 8th and Pine. By 2022, Mira North had quietly acquired over 700 units across Seattle. I didn't just want to own buildings. I wanted to protect them, preserve what was worth saving. Cities didn't just need investors, they needed stewards. Sitting across from Grant, I remembered my first time in the Ashcroft boardroom. I was 22, an unpaid intern with a spiral notebook and too much perfume. My uncles had laughed when I pitched a mixed-income model. Charity doesn't scale, they said. Now I was the one drawing the lines on the maps, not with pity, with purpose. At 2:17 p.m., the email pinged. Transfer complete. Ownership consolidated. Ashcroft Plaza is now under full control of Mira North Capital. I didn't react right away, just folded the laptop and let the quiet stretch between us. Grant raised his eyebrows. "You just bought your family's kingdom. Feels more like a cleanup job." "Still," he said, "it's yours." I thought of my mother's voice when I was 16 and got my first paycheck. "Some people just don't have the instinct for money," she'd said, looking at the envelope like it was a foreign currency. I remember thinking she wasn't wrong, except my instinct wasn't to hoard. It was to build. Later that evening, I walked back to Alder Grove. The stairs creaked under my feet like they always had. A girl sat on the 3rd step, sketching in a spiral-bound notebook. She looked up as I passed. "Are you the one who fixed the garden lights?" she asked. "I helped," I said. She nodded. "Thank you." "My grandma says you saved the building." I didn't respond, just smiled. Upstairs, my mailbox held nothing urgent. Some flyers, a utility update, a handwritten envelope. Inside was a card from Mrs. Lang. "Thank you for keeping our rent fair. Thank you for seeing us. It was signed with a heart and a tea stain. I set the card on the counter beside the lease binder. My phone buzzed again, Grant this time with logistics. The room where tomorrow's meeting would happen. The seating chart. How many copies of the audit packets to bring? I looked out the window. The city shimmered like a puzzle half solved. They thought tomorrow was about money. They were wrong. Tomorrow wasn't financial. It was personal. Brandon was holding court again this time with a glass of champagne and a fresh story about some minor partnership with a tech billionaire in Austin. His voice rose just enough to make sure the whole room could hear. I stood at the edge of the private lounge, watching him gesture toward a vision board no one had asked for, framed beside the buffet table like an altar to self-importance. Apparently, he said swirling the champagne, Mira North's CEO might stop by tonight. Rumor is they're scoping out the Southeast, probably to poach talent or buy out some distressed property. Typical aggressive expansion. Claire nodded as if she knew what any of that meant. Those types always come in flashy, don't they? Brandon smirked. They're never subtle. Or local. Victoria raised an eyebrow. I heard the CEO doesn't even live in Seattle. Some woman with offshore money, no family ties here. I sipped my drink slowly. The glass was cold in my hand. My fingers wrapped around the stem like it anchored me. No one looked my way. I wasn't expected to speak or be interesting. That had always worked in my favor. The door opened behind me. Grant stepped in crisp in a navy suit, briefcase in hand. His expression was unreadable posture, straight as a ruler. He paused just inside, scanning the room with the calm detachment of someone used to owning attention without needing to chase it. Brandon brightened. Grant, you made it. He moved toward him, hand extended. Grant didn't slow down. He walked past Brandon like a breeze through stale air, heading directly toward me. The room hushed just a notch. Ms. Morgan, he said, tone clean and professional. We're still on for 8 a.m. Tomorrow. The sound cracked the space like glass. Brandon's jaw clenched mid-smile. Victoria blinked twice. Claire's stiffened hand frozen over her wine. Yes, I said, keeping my voice calm. Conference room A, Grant added. Thank you again for making the acquisition seamless. Mira North's approach has always been surgical, but this was art. Precision is what we aim for, I replied, meeting his gaze, then slowly turning toward the others. I hope you've all enjoyed the space tonight. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Charles, my father, shifted in his seat. You own this, I turned fully toward him. For a while now, I said. Joanne's hand trembled as she set her glass down. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again, visibly calculating. Brandon frowned. But you, Mira North, is mine, I said. The air didn't rush out of the room. It was stolen. Like someone had cracked open a safe they never believed needed guarding. Claire blinked hard. This is a joke, right? I stepped forward and set my glass down on the mahogany buffet behind me. Grant clicked open the briefcase. Folders slid out one by one, each labeled neatly. Brandon Morgan Grant read aloud. Victoria Morgan. Claire Fielding. Charles Morgan. Joanne Morgan. Each name was met with a flicker of panic. Pale faces. Rapid blinking. Throats tightening. These are audit packets, I explained. They detail every transaction Mira North has reviewed regarding Ashcroft Plaza's operating budget for the last 5 fiscal years. Brandon's voice broke through first. You can't just, what is this, a stunt? No, I said. It's due diligence. Victoria reached for her folder, but hesitated. There's no way I have full equity. Silent buyout completed last year. This building and a dozen others have been under Mira North's umbrella since Q2. But you, Claire stammered. You show apartments? I work, I said. I've always worked. You just weren't paying attention. My father looked down at the folder bearing his name like it was a foreign object. You planned this, I nodded once. I had to. The truth sat there between us, not shouted, not dramatic, just fact. Grant folded his hands. You'll see that none of these packets were distributed outside this room. Yet, the word yet lingered. Brandon scoffed, though his voice lacked the usual sharpness. You're really doing this. I looked him in the eye, my voice even. I'm already doing it. No one moved. No one clinked a glass or refilled a drink. The party had stopped pretending. Now it was a reckoning. For years, I'd let them underestimate me. Let them pretend I wasn't in the room when decisions were made, or that my silence was agreement rather than strategy. Let them believe I had no seat at the table because I was building a new one from the ground up. And now they knew. They could barely speak my name, but they'd remember it. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. They just left. No slammed doors, no dramatic speeches, only the quiet shuffle of shoes on tile and the polite clatter of emptied glasses, like guests who finally realized they'd overstayed their welcome at a party they thought they owned. I stood by the window long after the last of them had gone, watching the skyline blur through the fog. Seattle was still half asleep, its buildings ghosted by mist and pale light. Below me, the Ashcroft building exhaled like a pressure valve had been released. No more pretending, no more hierarchy, just truth. Grant found me in the corridor holding a legal pad and a black coffee. He didn't speak at first, just handed me the cup and leaned against the wall. "We're clean," he said after a moment. "Legally. Some of them may try to spin it, but the filings are solid. You've got nothing to worry about." "Except Christmas dinner," I said. He smiled. "You weren't going anyway." "True enough." By noon, the silence had started to fray at the edges. Claire sent a group email to Morgan immediate family subject line concerned. She wrote that I had clearly been under stress and that the entire display was a cry for help, not vengeance. She hoped I'd seek support. I didn't reply. Victoria posted a black and white photo of a wine glass on her Instagram story with the caption, "Some people change when they get money." No names, no tags, just passive-aggressive gloss. Joanne sent a text late in the afternoon. "We didn't know. Maybe we didn't want to. I'm processing." I stared at the blinking cursor for a full minute before locking my screen. At Mira North's office, I sat in the small conference room with 3 staffers and 2 bankers who suddenly had a renewed interest in urban redevelopment. They spoke in polished phrases and cautious optimism, using words like optics and strategic repositioning. I nodded in all the right places, signed where needed, then excused myself. The drive to Alder Grove was slow traffic thick with post-rain jitters. My wipers ticked rhythmically across the windshield. As I turned the corner, a small boy stood on the sidewalk, bundled in a too-big jacket holding a red lunchbox. He waved at me with the earnestness only children can carry. I rolled down the window. "Hi," he said. "You're the one who made the benches, right?" I nodded. "Sort of. My grandma says you're the reason we still live here." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and waved back. At home, I changed into an old sweater, poured tea, and pulled up the dashboard. Numbers had a way of centering me. I scanned contracts, rent logs, energy reports. Mira North's balance sheet was clean, predictable, honest. The news alert popped up at 7:36 p.m. Anonymous developer who bought Ashcroft Plaza revealed as Morgan heiress. Below it, a blurred photo of me entering the building, one of Grant escorting board members. The article had quotes from sources close to the family and a glowing sidebar about Mira North's tenant policies. No direct quotes from me. I closed the tab. My phone buzzed again, Grant this time. Press is spinning at neutral. Some blowback, but nothing alarming. "Want to make a statement?" I typed, then deleted, then typed again. "No, let the paperwork speak." There was a calm in the quiet now. Not peace exactly, but presence. I looked around the room, worn rug recycled wood bookshelves, a stack of tenant thank you cards in a shoebox beside my desk. None of it expensive. All of it real. I opened the window. The wind smelled like pine and concrete. Seattle's own perfume. Then, almost without thinking, I opened my email and began drafting something. Subject line, Ashcroft Holiday Gathering, December 22nd, body. "You're invited. Food will be catered by local vendors. No speeches, just space. Everyone's welcome." I hit send. Grant replied within minutes. "Are you sure?" I looked back at the screen. At the empty subject line, the invitation that carried no agenda, no demand, just the possibility of return. "I am," I whispered. Then I said it aloud. "Let's do something different this year. Let's host the holiday party here. I didn't send the invitation to make peace. I sent it to make a point. There was no calligraphy, no crest, just a plain email addressed simply Morgan Family and Community. The subject line read, Ashcroft Rooftop, December 22nd, come if you'd like. The body was 2 sentences, no speeches, no expectations, just good food and a place to breathe. Some people replied, some didn't. Brandon never responded, not even a passive-aggressive text. I wasn't surprised. People like him weren't built for quiet tables. Victoria RSVP'd 15 hours before the event one line might stop by. Charles and Joanne didn't reply at all. Still, the lights were strung. The heaters clicked on just before dusk. The rooftop garden, usually reserved for curated events, felt like something new that night. Simple garlands, rented folding chairs, and long tables covered in mismatched runners. I'd asked a few local vendors to cater soups, baked apples, tamales, cider. Comfort food. Real food. People arrived in waves. Tenants from Alder Grove, staff from Mira North. A retired couple who'd lived in Ashcroft since the 80s brought a tray of homemade cookies. They'd made extras just in case. Victoria showed up late. No makeup, no photographer in tow. She wore a heavy gray coat and held a bottle of red wine in one hand already opened. I nodded at her. She nodded back. It was enough. Grant moved quietly through the space, making sure the trays stayed full and the music stayed soft. He wasn't a host exactly, just another pair of steady hands. Then I saw them. Charles and Joanne entered together side by side. He wore the same wool coat I remembered from my childhood, though it hung looser now. Joanne held a Tupperware dish wrapped in foil. Sweet potatoes, she said as she approached. Your grandmother's recipe. I still make them the same way. I took the dish from her hands. Thank you. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Later, when most guests had plates in their hands and conversation hummed low, I stepped forward. No microphone. Just my voice. This building has seen a lot, I said. Families, tenants, contractors, even feuds. But it stood. So tonight, I just want to say thank you for being part of its story. Let's rebuild how we gather inside it. There was no applause, just a few nods, the rustle of jackets, someone clearing their throat. It was perfect. Joanne found me near the railing holding 2 mugs of cider. She handed me one. Did you really build all this alone? She asked. I looked out over the streetlights below. Not alone, I said, but quietly. She didn't say anything else, just stood beside me. A young tenant tapped my arm, handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a card drawn in marker and crayon stick figures under a roof with hearts instead of windows. Thank you for not tearing down our home, it read. I blinked once, then tucked the card into my coat pocket. Later, as tables were cleared and guests trickled out, Charles approached. He didn't bring up the audit, or the emails, or the unspoken decades between us. Instead, he said, "Would you ever teach me how this works?" I held his gaze. "Only if you're ready to learn," I said. "Not led," he nodded. Once, slowly. Then turned back toward the stairs. I began stacking the trays with Grant packing leftovers into foil. Rain had started to mist again, sod and almost theatrical. Victoria lingered, drying plates with a towel someone had handed her. She glanced over. "I like this," she said. It felt honest. They replaced the family photo a few years back. The new one had everyone neatly arranged on the steps of the vineyard house, champagne in hand, coordinated shades of ivory and slate. I wasn't in it. I'd been invited that year technically, but the email came too late, and with too little sincerity to feel like anything but a formality. I didn't go. I used to wonder what it meant being erased like that. If it said more about them or about me. But now, as I stood in my office at Mira North, watching the morning light filter across a fresh stack of project folders, I realized something. There are frames they can crop and stories they can rewrite. But this is something they can't erase. January had settled in soft and cold. Seattle was still shaking off its post-holiday sleep. At Mira North HQ, the heat hissed quietly through the old vents, and interns trickled back in with lattes and new planners. I had meetings to prep and emails to review, but first I opened the drawer where I kept things that didn't belong in boardrooms. Inside were 2 photos. One was of me at 25, standing in front of my first closed deal hair, a little frizzy blazer, too big but smile wide and real. The second was a hand-drawn card from a tenant's daughter, thanking me for staying small to protect the big. I pinned them side by side. Later that week, we launched the Lorraine Morgan Preservation Fund. Named for my grandmother, it would support students and small developers committed to ethical community-first real estate. Not glamorous work, but necessary. The first class I taught was on a quiet Thursday. 12 folding chairs, a mismatched projector, half students, half community organizers. I started with a simple sentence. If you want to build something that matters, start where people actually live. Joanne visited Aldergrove that weekend. She didn't bring speeches or apologies, just a tin of lemon shortbread cookies and a soft knock on the courtyard door. I figured you'd like these, she said, for the real landlord. We sat on a bench, the air crisp. She asked how the roof repairs were going, if Mrs. Lang still kept the rose bushes alive, if the little boy with the red lunchbox was still around. I answered each question simply, and she listened without interruption. It was the longest we'd spoken in years. Charles came the next week. He didn't say much, just stood in the back of the Mira North training room, hands in his coat pockets, watching the session unfold. He held one of our prospectuses, the cover already creased at the fold. When it ended, he nodded once and left. But he returned the next week, and the one after. A press inquiry came in that afternoon. A national magazine wanted to run a profile. The hidden heiress who rebuilt the city, the pitch read. They asked for an official portrait. I declined. Instead, I sent a photo of the Aldergrove courtyard at sunset. No faces, just string lights over wooden benches and kids drawing chalk hopscotch between planter boxes. That evening, a little girl tugged at my coat outside the building. She handed me a drawing, our building lit from inside yellow windows glowing like lanterns. Stick figures stood on the roof holding cocoa mugs. I thanked her and tucked the drawing into my notebook. Then I walked back upstairs past the mail slots and welcome mats past years of memories not caught in any photo frame. I poured tea, opened a clean page, and wrote a single line. They took my seat at the table, so I built a new table with 2 chairs, not one. Sometimes what they take from the picture doesn't matter, because you were never meant to fit inside their frame. I found more truth in a child's drawing in a courtyard full of neighbors than I ever did at my family's table. Legacy, I've learned, isn't loud. It's quiet persistence. It's choosing to build even when no one believes you can. And often, the strongest foundation begins with being underestimated. If this story reminded you of a time you were counted out but kept going anyway, I'd love to hear it. What have you quietly built while the world wasn't watching?